Georgetown, South Carolina, a place so haunted by its past that even the hardest overseers refuse to work there. 17 documented incidents, 43 unexplained injuries, and one enslaved man whose name was deliberately erased from every plantation record. Yet his story echoed to the slave quarters of 3 counties for more than 40 years. In 1963, the private journal of a local magistrate was uncovered. It contained a single chilling entry about that man. "We have created something we cannot control. God forgive us for what we did to make him this way." What could turn a man into something that terrified even those who enslaved him? What kind of suffering could forge a person so dangerous that his own enslavers tried to erase his very existence? The answer lies buried within the meticulous ledgers of Georgetown's most profitable plantation. And what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about resistance, survival, and the true cost of cruelty. Before we continue with the story of the man they tried to erase from history, I need you to do something important. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Because stories like this, the ones they tried to bury, need to be heard. And leave a comment telling me what city or state you're listening from. I want to see how far this story travels. Our story begins not with violence, but with an arrival that seemed ordinary, at least by the brutal standards of 1819. Georgetown, South Carolina, in the spring of 1819, was a town built equally on rice and cruelty. The Waccamaw River twisted through the low country like a serpent, its banks lined with plantations that produced some of the finest rice in the Americas. The humid air was thick with the smell of pluff mud and the distant rhythm of work songs drifting across the water during the endless growing season. Fairhaven Plantation, owned by Marcus Hewitt, sat on 200 acres of rich bottomland. 300 enslaved people worked its fields, their lives measured in bushels harvested and tasks completed. Hewitt had inherited the property from his father, building his reputation on 2 things: the unmatched quality of his rice and his equally unmatched cruelty. Other planters whispered that he was too harsh, that his methods bred rebellion, but they couldn't argue with his profits. 8,000 barrels a year, each one steeped in suffering no ledger could ever record. The overseer, a weatherman named Silas Drummond, had served the Hewitts for 23 years. His face was lined like old leather, his hands scarred from decades of wielding the tools of his trade. He prided himself on his ability to manage enslaved people, that cruel euphemism meaning to break spirits without breaking bodies too badly to work. He had seen hundreds pass through Fairhaven's gates and believed he could size up a person's character within a week. He would be wrong about that. On a humid May morning, a call arrived from Charleston. 17 people chained together, their eyes hollow after a 100-mile march. Among them was a man known as Samuel. He stood just over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered from years of labor, with hands marked by the calluses of an iron worker. Auction records describe him as 26 years old, a trained blacksmith, purchased in the bankrupt estate of Thomas Radcliffe. But those records left out the most important details: that Samuel had been sold 5 times in 7 years, each sale following mysterious incidents at his previous plantations, and that the faint smile he gave Drummond during their first inspection held something others might have recognized as a warning if they had been paying attention. Beside him stood his wife, Clara, her hand gripping his despite the overseer's order not to touch. She was 4 months pregnant, a fact she'd hidden during the auction beneath loose clothing. Their 2 children had been sold separately in Charleston, sent to different plantations inland. Samuel had watched them go, his face a mask of calm, while something inside him hardened, like the iron he once forged. Fairhaven slave quarters stood in neat rows behind the main house, 40 wooden cabins, each sheltering 6 to 8 people. The raw pine boards had already weathered gray from the salt air and rain. Gaps between the planks let in mosquitoes in the summer and cold wind in the winter. Samuel and Clara were assigned to cabin 14, sharing it with 3 other couples and 2 children. The plantation ran on the task system common to low-country rice plantations. Each enslaved person was given a specific quota of work to complete each day, a task that typically demanded 12 to 14 hours during the growing season. Finish your task, and in theory, your time was your own. Fail, and punishment followed swiftly. It sounded more humane than the gang labor used on cotton plantations, but it was only cruelty in disguise. The tasks were designed to push the body to its limits, day after day, year after year, until it finally gave out. During those first weeks, Samuel worked the fields like everyone else, learning the rhythm of rice cultivation. The work was brutal, standing ankle-deep in water alive with snakes and alligators, bending thousands of times a day to plant or harvest, breathing air thick with mosquitoes that carried fever. His blacksmithing skills, once valuable enough to raise his auction price, went unused. Hewitt already had a blacksmith, an aging man named Joseph who had worked the plantation's forge for 30 years. Samuel was simply another pair of hands, another body from which to wring profit. But Samuel watched everything. He observed how Drummond moved through the plantation, the routes he took, the times he made his rounds. He noted which enslaved people held small positions of authority, the drivers who enforced orders, the house servants who overheard conversations in the main house. He watched how punishment was delivered, how resistance was crushed, how hope was drained from people until they became the walking dead. And he waited. Clara grew weaker as her pregnancy advanced. The field work and the meager food took their toll. She tried to hide her condition for as long as she could, knowing that pregnant women might be given lighter tasks, but also knowing they were often seen as less valuable more. When her pregnancy finally became impossible to hide, Drummond slightly reduced Clara's workload, but he added insult to that small mercy by assigning her to collect night soil from the main house. It was work considered especially degrading. One sweltering July evening, Samuel and Clara sat outside their cabin after the long day's labor. The air buzzed with mosquitoes and the dull hum of exhaustion. Clara spoke softly about the children they had lost. "I dream about them," she whispered, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "I dream that Thomas still remembers the song I used to sing to him, that little Mary remembers my face." Her voice broke. "But they'll forget us, won't they? They'll grow up, and we'll just be ghosts to them." Samuel didn't answer. His hands clenched his knees, knuckles white. His jaw moved slightly, as if chewing on words too dangerous to let escape. In that moment, something shifted behind his eyes, a cold, deliberate calculation forming in the darkness of his thoughts. The event that changed everything came 3 weeks later, on a Monday morning, when the heat already shimmered over the rice fields at dawn. Clara collapsed while carrying water to the field workers. Her body, weakened by pregnancy, hunger, and exhaustion, finally gave out. She fell face first into the mud between the rows of rice, unconscious, as the others rushed to her side. Drummond arrived within minutes, summoned by one of the drivers. He looked down at Clara's still body with a detached expression of a man calculating the cost of a broken tool. "Get her to the sick house," he ordered coldly, "but her task still needs to be finished. Samuel, you'll do her work today on top of your own, or you'll both taste the lash tomorrow." Samuel stood perfectly still for 3 long seconds. The other workers slowly stepped back, sensing something in his posture, something Drummond, blinded by arrogance, failed to see. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost conversational. "No." That single word dropped into the humid air, like a stone into still water. Drummond's face turned red. In 23 years of running plantations, he had heard enslaved people plead, bargain, cry, and scream, but open defiance, a simple no, was almost unthinkable. "What did you just say to me?" he barked. "I said no." Samuel's eyes met Drummond's without flinching. "You'll tend to my wife properly. You'll call for the doctor. You'll make sure she and the child survive, and then I'll finish both our tasks." The audacity of it stunned Drummond into silence. An enslaved man did not make demands. He didn't negotiate. He didn't speak to an overseer like an equal. The proper response was immediate, brutal punishment to remind everyone of their place. But something in Samuel's stillness made Drummond hesitate. Some primal instinct whispered at this moment, "And this man were different." "You're speaking mighty bold for someone who can be whipped within an inch of his life with that tone," Drummond said, his voice low and threatening. "You can whip me," Samuel replied, his voice still eerily calm. "You can whip me until the flesh falls from my bones. But Clara gets proper care first, or I don't work another day on this plantation. Not another minute, not another second. You can beat me to death if you want, but you'll get no more labor from me." And Mr. Hewitt will want to know why his property suddenly became worthless. It was masterful psychological warfare, framing his defiance not as rebellion, but as economics. He appealed not to mercy or justice, but to profit. Drummond's face twisted through a storm of emotions: rage, confusion, calculation. Finally, he spat into the dirt. "Fine, I'll send for the doctor, but you'll do double work for a week after this. And if you fail even one day, you and your wife both feel the consequences." Samuel nodded once, sharply, then bent to lift Clara gently from the mud. As he carried her toward the sick house, the others stepped aside like parting water. They had witnessed something unimaginable, a man who stared down an overseer and won, even if only for a moment. The whispers began that same day. The doctor arrived that afternoon, a young man named Patterson, who rode out from Georgetown more interested in his payment than in his patient. He examined Clara in the sick house, a drafty, foul-smelling building with 6 rough beds and the lingering scent of old sickness. His examination was brief, but his verdict was clear. "She needs complete bed rest for at least a week," he said flatly. "Proper food, no labor until after the child is born. The pregnancy is at risk. If you work her, you'll lose both mother and baby." Drummond carried that message to Marcus Hewitt that evening. The plantation owner listened while sipping whiskey on his veranda, watching the sun sink behind his fields. Hewitt, a thin-lipped man of 42, viewed the people he owned as livestock, resources to be managed for maximum profit. Losing Clara and her unborn child would be a financial setback, but giving her rest risked encouraging others to expect the same. Let her rest for a week, Hewitt decided finally. But Samuel must complete both tasks each day or face punishment. Make it clear this is a one-time accommodation. We can't have others thinking pregnancy earns them special treatment. What happened over the next week became legend, whispered in slave quarters across the Low Country for generations. Samuel did the impossible. Every morning before dawn, he went into the fields and completed his own task, a full day's backbreaking labor in the rice paddies that would exhaust any man. Then, as the sun climbed toward noon, he began Clara's task as well. Other workers watched in disbelief as he worked with a relentless rhythm that should have destroyed him. His hands bled, his back screamed, sweat poured from him in rivers, darkening the mud at his feet. But he finished. Every single day, he finished both tasks. By the third day, something remarkable began to happen. As Samuel worked alone in the section of the field assigned as Clara's, other enslaved people started drifting toward him during their short rest breaks. They said nothing. Speech would draw the overseer's attention, but they joined him, working silently beside him. 10 minutes here, 15 there, a row of rice at a time. They worked quietly, a weed pulled here while pretending to rest in shade, a few rows of rice planted under the guise of adjusting a tool. It was resistance in its purest, most subtle form, collective defiance so discreet that the overseers never noticed. But it was enough to keep Samuel from collapsing. Drummond noticed, though. On the 4th day, he watched from a distance as Samuel received that secret assistance. His face darkened with understanding. This was what overseers feared most. Enslaved people working together, forming invisible networks of solidarity that eroded the isolation every enslaved person was meant to feel. One defiant man could be controlled. A community quietly uniting around him was something far more dangerous. That evening, Drummond appeared outside Cabin 14 and called Samuel out. 3 other overseers stood behind him, holding torches that cast long, writhing shadows across the rows of cabins. The meaning was clear. This was going to be a lesson, one meant for everyone to see. "You've been getting help in the fields," Drummond said. "That wasn't part of our arrangement. You said you do both tasks yourself." "I have done both tasks," Samuel replied carefully. "Every evening you've inspected my work and Clara's work and found them both complete. Any help I received was freely given, during other people's time after their tasks were finished. You have no ground for complaint." And he was right. The logic of the task system worked against Drummond here. If someone had completed their assigned work, their remaining time was their own, at least on paper. But Drummond wasn't interested in logic. He was interested in power. "Strip your shirt," Drummond ordered. For the first time since this ordeal began, Samuel hesitated. Around them, cabin doors opened as people stepped out into the humid night, drawn by the commotion. Clara appeared in the doorway of cabin 14, one hand braced against the frame, her face pale but her eyes burning with defiance. Samuel looked at her once, then slowly removed his shirt. His back was a map of scars, some faded, others still raw, the permanent inscriptions of a life lived under the lash. Each mark a record of someone else's cruelty. Drummond examined those scars by torchlight, then drew his whip, a braided length of leather that had tasted hundreds of backs. "This isn't about the work," Drummond said quietly, making sure the growing crowd could hear. "This is about remembering your place, about understanding that we decide when you've earned mercy, not you." The first lash tore across Samuel's shoulders, raising a welt that immediately bled. He did not cry out. The second blow fell, then the third. Still, Samuel stood silent, fists clenched, jaw locked tight. By the 10th strike, Drummond was panting from the effort, but also from frustration. Enslaved people were supposed to scream, to plead, to break. Samuel's silence was its own rebellion, and everyone watching knew it. "Kneel," Drummond hissed. Samuel didn't move. "I said kneel." Drummond's voice cracked with rage. "You can beat me until I can't stand," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the pain blazing across his back. "But I won't kneel. Not for you. Not for any man who thinks he owns me." A collective breath rippled through the crowd. This wasn't physical resistance. It was something more dangerous, the open rejection of the entire system. Drummond raised his whip again, but before it struck, a voice cut through the night. "That's enough, Silas." Marcus Hewitt stepped out from the darkness beyond the torchlight. A domestic servant had alerted him to the gathering. He approached slowly, studying Samuel the way a naturalist might study a venomous animal. "You're quite remarkable," Hewitt said evenly. "In my experience, pride like yours is either beating out a man or consumes him entirely. Which do you suppose it'll be for you?" Samuel met his gaze without flinching. "I reckon time will tell, sir." Hewitt's thin lips curled into a faint smile. "Indeed it will." Then, louder for all to hear, he said, "Silas, that's enough punishment for now. Samuel has fulfilled his obligations. His wife may rest for the remainder of the week, as the doctor prescribed." He turned to the watching crowd. "All of you, back to your cabins. And remember, mercy is granted at our discretion, not demanded as a right. We are generous when we choose to be, and generosity can be taken away just as easily as the people disperse into shadows." Hewitt leaned close to Samuel, his voice low and dangerous. "You have something that worries me," he murmured. "Intelligence and will. That's a dangerous combination in a slave. I'll be watching you very carefully from now on. And trust me, you don't want my attention." 6 weeks later, on an October morning when the first cool breath of autumn touched the air, Clara gave birth. It was a girl, healthy against all odds. They named her Ruth. For a brief, shining moment, something like hope lived in that small cabin. Samuel held his daughter with a tenderness that seemed at odds with the iron hardness that had formed inside him. Clara sang the same lullabies she had once sung to the children they had lost. But hope was fragile at Fairhaven. In November, Joseph, the plantation's blacksmith, died suddenly from a fever that swept through the quarters. The old man had trained no apprentice, and the forge stood silent at the worst possible time. Tools were breaking faster than they could be replaced. The rice harvest had dulled every blade and worn every hinge. Marcus Hewitt remembered that Samuel had been listed as a trained blacksmith. 2 days after Joseph's death, Samuel was reassigned from field work to the forge. On the surface, it looked like an improvement. Blacksmithing was skilled work, performed under a roof, away from the sweltering fields. But Hewitt's motives had nothing to do with mercy. He needed a blacksmith, and he wanted Samuel under his watchful eye. The forge sat just 50 yards from the main house, perfectly visible from Hewitt's study window. Samuel approached it on that first morning with mixed feelings. Metalwork had once been his craft, before the endless cycle of sales it had. As long as you cause me no trouble, your family will remain together. But if you ever defy me again, even in small ways, I'll see to it that your wife and child are sold so far apart that they'll never hear each other's names again. Do you understand me? Samuel's jaw tightened. I understand you perfectly, sir. Hewitt turned back toward him, his expression smooth and unreadable. Good. Then we have an agreement. You see, Samuel, control isn't maintained by the whip alone. It's maintained by understanding what a man fears most and ensuring he remembers it. Samuel said nothing. He bowed his head slightly, the gesture outwardly submissive but hollow inside. He'd learned long ago that survival required masks, and at that moment, he wore his most convincing one. Return to your cabin, Hewitt said, already reaching again for his papers, and enjoy the holiday. You've earned it. Samuel walked out into the cold night air. The sound of distant laughter drifted from the quarters where few had already begun their meager celebration. When he reached his cabin, Clara was waiting just inside the door, her eyes wide with unspoken questions. It's all right, Samuel whispered, closing the door behind him. We're safe for now. She touched his face gently, tracing one of the scars that still marked his cheek. What did he want? To talk, Samuel said quietly. To remind me who owns what. He looked at their sleeping daughter in the cradle and added, but he doesn't understand. He can own our bodies, but not our minds. For a moment, silence filled the small room, heavy, but not hopeless. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying faint echoes of him sung under breath. The quiet songs of endurance passed from one generation to the next. In the weeks that followed, Samuel threw himself into his work at the forge. He trained others as ordered, teaching them precise rhythm of hammer and anvil, the way metal yielded only to patience and control. Yet beneath the surface of obedience, something else began to take shape, a quiet exchange of knowledge, of skill, of trust. The tools they crafted were for the plantation, but the lessons Samuel shared were for the future. How to read the stars, how to follow the hidden paths through the marsh, how to use iron for more than plows and chains. Each day's labor became a cover for something greater, something dangerous. And though Hewitt watched from his study window, confident in his own mastery, Samuel knew a truth the master could never comprehend, that even in bondage, the smallest act of teaching, of remembering, of refusing to kneel, was the seed of freedom itself. That evening, Sterling dined with Hewitt at the main house. The long table was set with polished silver and candlelight, the air heavy with the scent of roasted meat and tobacco smoke. The conversation between the two men began politely. The state of the rice market, weather patterns, the latest news from Charleston. But it didn't stay polite for long. Over glasses of brandy, Sterling began weaving his story. You've got yourself a fine blacksmith here, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. Trained up in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. Fredericksburg, under a man named Radcliffe. Hewitt glanced up, intrigued. You seem to know something about him. Sterling smiled. I do. In fact, I knew his previous owner. Samuel, as you call him, has quite a past. There was an incident, a fire. A young man died, Radcliffe's son, if memory serves. Hewitt's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. And you're certain it was the same man? As certain as I am sitting here, Sterling said, leaning forward. Radcliffe sold him within a week. There was talk the fire wasn't accidental. Of course, no one could prove anything. The only witness was the slave himself. Silence stretched between them for a long moment. Then Hewitt said quietly, "That's quite a tale. Why are you telling me this?" Sterling smiled again, the kind of smile that never reaches eyes. "Because I thought you might appreciate knowing exactly what kind of man you got working your forge. And perhaps, if you're no longer comfortable keeping him here, I might take him off your hands. For a fair price, of course." Hewitt studied Sterling for a moment longer, then leaned back in his chair. "I see. You're proposing a transaction. Call it a favor," Sterling said, his tone oily. "I take a potential problem off your property. You keep your operation running smoothly. Everyone wins." Hewitt's fingers tapped once against the arm of his chair. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "But for now, let's enjoy our evening." They returned to safer topics, but the undercurrent of threat lingered. Sterling had planted the seed, and he knew it. When the dinner ended and the trader retired to the guest quarters, Hewitt remained in his study, staring into the dying fire. If what Sterling said was true, Samuel wasn't just intelligent and defiant. He was dangerous, a man capable of killing, even if by accident, but he was also too valuable to discard without consideration. The forge couldn't run without him, at least not yet. Hewitt's decision came slowly, hardening like cooling iron. He would not act rashly. He would observe, watch, confirm the story for himself. Meanwhile, in cabin 14, Samuel sat awake long after Clara and Ruth had fallen asleep. He stared at the flickering shadows on the wall, his mind replaying the trader's words. He knew what Sterling intended. Leverage, blackmail, maybe even sale. His past had followed him farther than he'd ever imagined. He had spent years suppressing the memory of that night in Virginia, convincing himself that the fire was an accident, that he'd had no choice. But now, it threatened to destroy everything he'd built. He turned toward the cradle where Ruth slept peacefully, unaware of the world that waited beyond those thin wooden walls. Samuel made a silent promise then. If his past came for him, he would not let it claim his family. Not again. Outside, a cold wind swept through the quarters, rattling loose shutters and carrying with it the faint sound of the river beyond the marsh. The world was shifting again, and Samuel could feel it. The fragile balance he'd built was about to break. Samuel didn't know what had been said between them, but the next morning, Hewitt summoned him again. "Mr. Sterling has brought something to my attention," Hewitt began bluntly. "He shared some troubling information about your past. He also made me an offer, a generous one. He's willing to pay top dollar to buy you and take you back to Virginia, where it seems you're wanted for questioning about a fire that killed a white boy." Samuel's blood ran cold. "I had nothing to do with that boy's death, sir." Hewitt's expression didn't change. "Perhaps it was an accident," he said evenly. "But the law in Virginia might not see it that way. Sterling believes they wouldn't." He paused before continuing. "However, I've turned down his offer. You're too valuable to me as a blacksmith, and I don't make business decisions based on rumors. But hear me well. If you give me any reason to regret keeping you, if there's even the slightest trouble, I'll sell you to Sterling without hesitation. Your family stays here, and you'll go north to face whatever awaits you there." The new threat hung over Samuel like a blade. Sterling stayed in Georgetown for 3 more days, finishing his business. Samuel knew the man was waiting, hoping Hewitt would change his mind. Every moment felt uncertain, as if the ground beneath him could give way at any second. On Sterling's final night in Georgetown, something happened that would change everything. The trader joined several wealthy plantation owners for dinner at a tavern in town, a gathering that included Hewitt and 2 other landowners. They drank whiskey and talked about business and politics late into the night, their voices growing louder as the liquor flowed. Samuel only heard about it the next day from Rachel, a domestic servant who had been working at the tavern that night. She told the story in whispers, her voice trembling with anger. Sterling, she said, had been boasting about his success in the slave trade, bragging about how he broke those who resisted. He described in chilling detail his methods: isolation, calculated violence, and psychological torture, techniques meant to shatter a person's will. But what made Rachel's hand shake as she spoke was the story Sterling told about a woman he'd purchased in Charleston a year before, a woman with 2 children, a boy around 5 and a girl around 3. He bragged about separating them, selling each to different buyers in Georgia, and watching the mother's spirit collapse as she was loaded onto a ship bound for Cuba. Sterling had laughed, describing her screams as entertainment. The description fit Samuel and Clara's children perfectly: the ages, the timing, the departure from Charleston. When Samuel heard this, something deep within him broke. He walked to the forge in silence, Rachel's words echoing in his mind. His children, sold and scattered like seeds in the wind, their fates unknown. Their mother, torn from them and sent to Cuba, where slavery was even more merciless. And Sterling, laughing about it, turning their agony into a drunken story. Samuel stood before the forge for a long time, staring into the fire. Then, slowly, he began to work. His hands moved with precision and purpose, shaping something specific. Hour after hour, long past midnight, after everyone had gone to their cabins, he forged something he had imagined many times but never dared to make. Keys, 3 of them, each carefully crafted to fit the locks he had studied since arriving at Fairhaven. 1 for the storage shed, 1 for the tack room, and 1 for the smokehouse near the edge of the plantation grounds. He made them small and easy to hide, testing each one in its lock when no one was watching. He had no clear escape plan. The odds of fleeing South Carolina were slim, and the punishment for being caught was unthinkable. But Samuel needed to know he could move freely if the time came. He needed some shred of control in a world built to take it from him. Just when it seemed things couldn't get more complicated, new events began to unfold. The first steps toward a terrible, inevitable end. If this story gave you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our work. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. What followed wasn't sudden or dramatic. It crept in slowly, calculated and terrifying in its precision. The first incident happened on a cool March evening, 3 weeks after Sterling's departure. Drummond discovered that his favorite riding crop, a braided leather whip he used on both horses and people, had gone missing from the tack room. Furious, he accused the enslaved workers of stealing it out of defiance. He ordered their quarters searched, overturning bedding and belongings while everyone stood by helplessly. The crop was never found. A week later, Marcus Hewitt's prized hunting dog, a pointer imported from England, was found dead in its kennel. The death seemed natural. The dog had been old and weak, but Hewitt demanded a veterinary examination. The vet found no proof of foul play, but noted that the symptoms could match poisoning by oleander, a deadly plant that grew wild around the plantation. 2 weeks later, Drummond fell violently ill. For 3 days he lay bedridden, gripped by stomach pains. The doctor said it was food poisoning, perhaps spoiled meat, but the cook swore all the food had been fresh, and no one else had gotten sick. Each incident on its own seemed ordinary: accidents, misfortunes, bad luck. But together, they painted a pattern that made Hewitt uneasy. He began to suspect sabotage. He had no proof, no clear suspect, but something in his gut warned him that someone was quietly striking back. He tightened patrols, enforced stricter curfews, and watched his enslaved workers with growing suspicion. Samuel continued his work at the forge, training his apprentices and keeping his daily routine, but those who knew him best noticed subtle changes. Clara saw the way he sometimes stared into the fire, his expression distant, unreadable, and frightening. Rachel observed how he stayed up later and later, the sound of his hammer echoing through the night long after everyone else had gone to rest. The men in cabin 14 whispered about how Samuel would wake in the dark and sit silently for hours, unmoving, as if deep in communion with something unseen. In May, a traveling preacher arrived in Georgetown, a Methodist minister named Reverend Thompson, who made regular circuits through the Low Country, preaching to both white and enslaved congregations. Like many plantation owners, Hewitt allowed, even encouraged, these visits. He believed Christianity made the enslaved more obedient, more accepting of their fate. That Sunday morning, Thompson preached to Fair Haven's enslaved community in a clearing near the quarters. His sermon came from the book of Exodus, the story of the Israelites' bondage in Egypt and their eventual deliverance. Thompson was cautious, shaping his message to emphasize patience and obedience, trying not to ignite rebellion. But the story itself defied his caution. It was about an enslaved people rising, about a tyrant struck down by divine wrath, and about a journey toward freedom through suffering and perseverance. Samuel listened with focus that unsettled those around him. When Thompson spoke of the plagues, water turning to blood, the death of livestock, darkness over the land, Samuel's lips moved silently, as if committing each word to memory. When the preacher described Pharaoh's army drowning in the Red Sea, Samuel's hands curled into fists. After the service, Samuel approached Thompson quietly. "Reverend," he asked, "in your reading of Exodus, was Moses justified in killing the Egyptian overseer before God called him to lead his people?" Thompson hesitated, clearly uneasy. "That was complicated," he said. "Moses fled into exile after that act. It wasn't part of God's plan for liberation, but he did it anyway," Samuel pressed. "He saw injustice and acted, even though it cost him everything." "Brother Samuel," Thompson said softly, "I sense you're troubled, but vengeance belongs to the Lord, not to man. Our suffering here is temporary. Justice will come in the next life." Samuel's eyes hardened. And what if waiting for the next life means accepting injustice in this one? What if patience is just another word for cowardice? Thompson had no answer. He muttered something about faith and endurance, then quickly turned to speak with others. But the conversation lingered in his mind, enough that he later mentioned it to Hewitt before leaving Fair Haven. The plantation owner made a mental note, another sign that Samuel was thinking dangerous thoughts. The breaking point came in June, in the stifling heat of the growing season, when tempers were short and exhaustion ran deep. Clara, who'd been given lighter duties since Ruth's birth, was suddenly reassigned full field work by a new overseer named Jacob Cross, a man recently hired to replace the aging Drummond. Cross was young, ambitious, and eager to impress Hewitt by increasing productivity. He viewed Clara's lighter workload as weakness, an indulgence to be corrected. When Samuel learned of this, he went straight to Hewitt's study. "Sir, you promised Clara would have lighter duties while she's nursing," he said firmly. "Sending her to the fields breaks that agreement." Hewitt looked up from his papers, irritation crossing his face. "That arrangement was made when you were my only blacksmith. You've trained 3 others now. The situation has changed. Your wife returns to full duties. If that's a problem, perhaps we should revisit Sterling's offer to buy you." The threat was unmistakable. But this time, Samuel didn't yield. "Then revisit it," he said quietly, "because I won't stand by while you break your word and destroy my wife's health." Hewitt froze, stunned. An enslaved man had just spoken to him not with fear, but defiance. They weren't supposed to protest, to question, or to speak of promises, as if such things bound their masters. This wasn't just disobedience. It was rebellion in its purest form. "Get out of my house," Hewitt hissed, his voice trembling with fury, "and know that you've just sealed your family's fate." That night, Samuel didn't return to cabin 14. He went to the forge instead and worked without pause, the rhythmic strikes of hammer on metal echoing through the darkness like a heartbeat. Clara found him near midnight, Ruth rapped against her chest. "What are you doing?" she whispered, frightened by the firelight glinting off his sweat and the wild look in his eyes. "I'm making a choice," Samuel said, his hand steady and fierce as he shaped the glowing metal into something she couldn't recognize in the dim light. "For 8 years, I've bent. I've submitted. I've swallowed every humiliation because I thought if I just endured long enough, if I played by their rules, I could keep us safe." His voice hardened. "But there is no safety, Clara. There are no rules. Not for us. Only their whims, their cruelty, and our pain." "Samuel," she whispered, "you're scaring me." He stopped working and turned toward her. For the first time in weeks, he truly looked at her, and something in his face softened. "I know," he said, "and I'm sorry, but I can't be what they want me to be anymore. I can't be docile. I can't pretend this is acceptable. Something has to break. Clara, and I've decided it won't be me again." "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What are you planning?" Samuel didn't answer. Instead, he reached behind the forge and pulled out a small cloth bundle he'd hidden months earlier. Inside were the 3 keys he had forged, and a few other items: a knife, a coil of rope, a tinderbox. "If something happens to me," he said quietly, "you take Ruth and go north. Use these keys to get supplies from the storage shed. There's an old canoe in the marsh near the south field. I found it months ago. Take it up the river at night. When the patrols are asleep, follow the stars. Find people who will help you." "You're talking about running," Clara whispered. "Samuel, they'll kill you if they catch you. They'll kill all of us." "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I'll do something that makes running unnecessary." Before Clara could ask what he meant, for a few 10 seconds, footsteps echoed toward the forge. It was Cross, the new overseer, flanked by 2 other white men Samuel didn't recognize. They carried rifles, their steps unsteady, the smell of alcohol clinging to them. Well, Cross sneered. "The troublemaker who thinks he can make demands of Mr. Witt. You've got a lot of nerve, boy. I think it's time someone reminded you where you stand." Samuel slowly set down his hammer, his eyes darting between the 3 men, silently measuring his chances. "It's late," he said calmly. "Whatever you want can wait until morning." "Nah," Cross replied, stepping closer. "I don't think it can. Mr. Hewitt told me you need an attitude adjustment. Said I could handle it however I saw fit. And I think a night in the stocks might cool that rebellious spirit of yours." The stocks were a punishment device that held people motionless through the night, left at the mercy of the weather, insects, and the jeers of anyone who passed. It was a punishment designed to crush dignity as much as flesh. "I won't go to the stocks," Samuel said quietly. Cross laughed. "You don't get a say in it." What happened next was so fast that Clara barely understood what she was seeing. Cross reached for Samuel, aiming to drag him toward the punishment area. But Samuel moved like lightning. Years at the forge had honed his reflexes. He caught Cross's wrist, twisted it until man cried out in pain, and struck his throat with his free hand. Not enough to crush the windpipe, but enough to send the overseer staggering backward, gasping for breath. The other 2 men raised their rifles, but Samuel had already moved, placing the heavy anvil between himself and their line of fire. "I said, I won't go to the stocks," he repeated, his voice low and steady. "You can shoot me if you want, but then you'll have to answer to Mr. Hewitt for destroying his valuable blacksmith. Or you can walk away. Come back in the morning with more men if you need to feel brave." It was a standoff that could only end one way. The men were armed, backed by the full weight of law that gave them power over life and death. Samuel had just struck white men, an act punishable by mandatory death under South Carolina law. But in that moment, lit by the forge fire's flickering glow, Samuel's eyes burned with something that looked dangerously close to freedom, and the men hesitated. Cross, clutching his throat and wheezing, finally rasped, "You just signed your own death warrant. By morning, you'll be hanging from a tree, and your wife and brat will be sold so far south you'll never even be a memory to them." Samuel's expression didn't change. "Then you better make sure you hang me," he said, because if I'm still alive by morning, you'll regret it." The three men backed away, their faces twisted with hate as they disappeared into the dark. As soon as they were gone, Clara grabbed Samuel's arm. "What have you done?" she whispered. "They'll kill you. They'll kill all of us." "They were always going to kill us," Samuel said softly. There was an eerie calm in his voice, as if he had stepped beyond fear. "Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. This system kills us slowly if we obey, or quickly if we resist. At least this way I got to choose." He pulled Clara close, kissed her forehead, then kissed Ruth's. "Take the keys. Take the supplies. Go tonight. Don't wait. I won't leave you. You have to, for Ruth. Give her the chance I couldn't give Thomas and Mary." Shouts erupted from the direction of the main house, Cross raising the alarm, men gathering, preparing to return with overwhelming force. Samuel pressed a cloth bundle into Clara's hands. "Go now, please." Clara stood frozen for one final heartbeat, tears streaking down her face. Then she turned and ran into the night, clutching Ruth in the bundle that held their only hope. Samuel watched until the darkness swallowed them. Then he turned back to the forge. If they were coming to kill him, he wouldn't make it easy. He stoked the fire until it roared, picked up his best hammer, and positioned himself to face the direction of their approach. His mind raced. How many men, what weapons, what chances he had to survive even one more hour. The odds were impossible, but he had faced impossible odds all his life. The mob that formed was 15 men strong, armed and furious. The kind of fury white men reserved for those they thought beneath them who dared to fight back. They surrounded the forge, torches flickering, weapons gleaming. Hewitt himself stepped forward. "Samuel, come out. This can end peacefully if you surrender now." Samuel laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed across the yard. "Peace? You mean my peaceful execution? My peaceful murder, what you call it, justice? You attacked an overseer. The law is clear about the penalty." "Your law," Samuel spat. "Your justice. Your system that says you can own people, work them to death, tear their families apart, and never pay the price. I'm done pretending that system means anything." The crowd murmured angrily at his defiance. Hewitt's face hardened. "Then you've chosen death. We'll burn you out." And that's exactly what they did. Torches flew through the air, landing on the forge's wooden roof. The dry pine caught instantly, flames racing across the structure. The heat grew unbearable, smoke filling the air until it choked the lungs. Samuel had maybe 2 minutes before everything collapsed in fire. He made his choice. He could die in the flames, his story forgotten, his rebellion turned into a warning whisper to others. Or he could give them something they'd never forget, something that would make them fear every enslaved man who dared to look them in the eye. Samuel seized a long iron rod from the forge, glowing red hot. Then with a roar, he charged out of the burning building straight into the crowd. What followed was chaos. Samuel swung the blazing rod like a weapon, scattering men in every direction, their clothes igniting where the metal touched them. He broke through their line and ran, not away but toward. But not toward the quarters where Clara might be hiding. Instead, Samuel ran toward the rice fields, leading the pursuit away from his family. Rifle shots cracked through the darkness, but Samuel was fast, driven by pure adrenaline and the desperate energy of a man who had nothing left to lose. The chase went on through the night, a deadly game across the dark, wet fields and treacherous marshlands surrounding Fairhaven. Samuel's intimate knowledge of the plantation's terrain served him well. He guided his pursuers into the worst places imaginable, through thick mud, across deep irrigation ditches, into areas crawling with snakes and alligators where even the bravest man hesitated. Several of the pursuers were hurt before the night was over. One man fell into a ditch and broke his leg. Another was bitten by a water moccasin and had to be carried back to the plantation. When dawn finally broke, Samuel had evaded capture for 7 full hours, an almost unthinkable feat that would be whispered about for years afterward. But exhaustion was closing in, and his hunters had been reinforced by slave catchers from neighboring plantations. Dogs had been brought in, their baying cutting through the morning air like a death knell. Samuel made his last stand in a grove of cypress trees at the edge of Hewitt's property, his back pressed to a massive trunk, the iron rod still burning faintly in his hands. When the men finally surrounded him, he was coated in mud, blood streaking down his arms, yet still standing, still defiant, still unbroken. "Shoot him," someone shouted. But Hewitt, who had followed the chase himself, raised a hand. "No," he said coldly. "He's destroyed valuable property, injured several men, and wasted an entire night's work. He doesn't get a quick death. He gets an example." They dragged Samuel to Georgetown's public square, the place where punishments and executions were held as public spectacles. A post had already been erected, ready for him. Hundreds of townspeople gathered, eager for the show. The sentence was clear: whipping until death. A punishment so horrifying could last for hours, meant to break a person's body, spirit, and will, to turn resistance into despair for all who witnessed it. But before the first lash could fall, something unexpected happened. Clara appeared at the edge of the crowd, Ruth in her arms, 2 enslaved men from Fair Haven at her side. She had not run as Samuel told her to. Instead, she had hidden through the night and, when morning came, made her choice to be there no matter the cost. "I want to see him," she called out, her voice strong and clear. "I have the right to say goodbye to my husband." The crowd murmured. Technically, she had no rights at all. Yet there was something in her presence, a quiet dignity, that made even the angry mob pause. Hewitt, wanting to appear merciful before the horror to come, waved her forward. Clara walked slowly through the parted crowd until she stood before Samuel, tied to the post. Their eyes met, and in that moment, an entire conversation passed silently between them. She reached up, touched his face gently, and then spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You are the bravest man I have ever known," she said. "You never bent. You never broke. You never accepted that they had the right to own us. And because of that, you're free in a way they will never understand. Our daughter will know your name. She'll know what you fought for. She'll know her father died standing up rather than living on his knees." Then Clara did something that sent a shock through the crowd. She leaned forward and kissed him, long, tender, unashamed, in full view of everyone. It was more than a kiss. It was a declaration of love, of humanity, of marriage, of everything the system of slavery tried to erase. It was rebellion, pure and defiant, just as Samuel's fight had been. When she finally stepped back, Samuel turned his gaze over the sea of white faces twisted with anger, disgust, and fear. His voice rose above the murmuring crowd. "You think you're about to punish one difficult slave," he said. "You're not. You're creating a story that will be told in every quarter in South Carolina. You're making me into something you can't control, a memory, an example, a promise that resistance is possible. You can destroy my body, but you can't destroy what I stand for. There are hundreds like me, thousands, all waiting for their moment. You should be afraid, because we are coming." Moments later, the whipping began. What followed over the next several hours was too brutal to describe. An ordeal meant not only to kill him, but to break his soul, to force him to beg for mercy he would never receive. But witnesses later said Samuel never screamed. He never begged. He never gave them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. He endured it all in silence, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the pain, beyond the crowd, beyond this world. When the sun reached its highest point, Samuel died, still bound to the post, still unyielding, still defiant. His body was left there for 2 days, a warning to every enslaved person who might think of rebellion. 3 days later, Clara was sold, along with Ruth, to a planter in Georgia. But she kept her promise. She told her daughter about Samuel, about his strength, his courage, and his sacrifice. And Ruth told her own children years later, after emancipation finally came. The story passed down through generations, changing in details, but never in truth, that once there had been a man who refused to accept slavery, a man who fought back even when it cost him everything, a man who died enslaved in body but free in spirit. Fairhaven's plantation records show a strange gap in 1820, several pages torn from the ledgers, erasing all mention of Samuel and his death. Marcus Hewitt died in 1831. Locals said he became paranoid in his final years, sleeping with weapons by his bed, jumping at every sound, terrified of shadows that carried the weight of his guilt. The forge at Fairhaven was never rebuilt. The ground where it once stood was left barren, as if everyone silently agreed that some places should remain untouched. In Georgetown's historical archives, a letter survives, written in 1867 by a woman who had once been enslaved at Fairhaven. In it, she recalled the stories the elders used to tell in the quarters, stories about a man so dangerous his name had been forbidden to speak aloud. We called him the man who stood, she wrote, and we told ourselves that if he could stand against them, then maybe someday we all could too. This mystery reminds us that the most dangerous person in any unjust system isn't always the one who fights with violence, but the one who refuses to accept the system's lie, who will not internalize the illusion that such a system is legitimate. Samuel's defiance wasn't only about his own freedom. It was a direct rejection of the entire philosophy of slavery itself, the idea that any human being could rightfully claim ownership over another. His stand was not just an act of rebellion, but an act of truth. So, what do you think of this story? Do you believe we've learned everything there is to know? Was Samuel a hero, a martyr, or simply a man driven past the limits of endurance? Share your thoughts in the comments below if the story moved you, and if you want to hear more tales of forgotten resistance and buried history. Don't forget to subscribe, ring the notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries that challenge the way we understand the past. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always worth knowing.